let's get right into the webinar series. For Mac admins by Apple experts. At Adigy, we do all things Apple. The Sudo Talks monthly webinar series is our way of sharing insights about the Apple ecosystem that you as an IT admin can take advantage of and stay ahead of the curve. So we're really excited about this series. I think this is, maybe like the 6th one, if that. So it's a fairly new series. So. Yeah. Fairly new series that we've been trying to launch. We're going to actually talk about why we picked this webinar, or who picked this webinar in the first place, as to kind of what the topic is based around and why and all that good stuff. So let's get right into it. Today's specific topic is how to automate the hardening of macOS devices, automating security. We'll get into a bunch of different concepts and topics here, but that's the overall purpose of this webinar. So if you're here, like, what am I doing here? That's the main purpose. All right. So I am Nicholas Ponce. I am VP of Ops and Security here at Adigy. I have the privilege of leading these two teams. Nathan, want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Nathan Pablon. I am an application security engineer here at Adigy. Been here for about a little over a year, and I work to improve our security posture as well as improve our SOC 2, specifically like SOC 2 compliance related tasks here and there. In the picture, my hair is much shorter now. Now it has grown quite a lot since then, so I may need to get an updated headshot at some point. But yeah.
Yeah, those pictures were taken, if you're curious, they were taken mid-COVID. That's why you see those masks around our necks, and they were kind of like a spontaneous picture, if you would. Turn the corner, and the marketing team's taking a picture of you. Fortunately for me, my hair is about the same. My beard was a little messy because of the mask, but yeah, that's a little bit about us. As Nathan mentioned, he does a lot of security and compliance stuff here at Adigy internally, as well as I do. I also have the privilege of working with some of you all regularly in MacAdmin Slack. I have the Slack handle Ponce in there, and our private Adigy integration Slack workspace. If you're not there, feel to reach out to us. We'll invite you. We talk a lot about our different betas and things in there. So, so here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about, what does this even mean? What is the purpose of hardening macOS devices? What does hardening mean? We're going to talk about automating and remediating the fleet, or your clients, or your locations, however you want to, whatever terminology you want to use, and setting up automatic notifications if an issue is detected, and automating, integrating with third-party tools and applications. So it's going to be a very fun webinar. We actually have been okay to talk about some of the new feature we're working on that's going to make this a lot easier. We'll tell you more about it at the end. So if you're really interested in what we were calling the compliance engine, please stay to the end, and we will share more insight about that, what it looks like, how it's going to work. At a high level, we don't want to steal all the thunder of the product team. They will be doing a product update, I believe, in a week or two to announce that feature. So
very soon.
Yeah, very soon. So first and foremost, we want to give a shout out to our Reddit community. Our marketing team has been doing a bunch of work in Reddit to kind of foster the community, including a lot of the technical team participating there. They launched this poll, what webinars do you want to see next? And you can actually see we didn't make this up. This webinar series was actually picked by the Reddit community. So 26 votes for hardening macOS. So if you're in Reddit and voted, thank you. If you're not in Reddit, check it out. We're trying to foster a bigger community there. We're also really active in macAdmin Slack, in our private Adigy integration Slack workspace, amongst a few other places like MSP Geek and a bunch of other communities. So if we're missing in a community and we're mentioned regularly, please let us know. We'd be happy to kind of participate and jump into that community. But long story short, we did a poll. The poll resulted in many community members voting on this specific topic for this webinar, and that's kind of the driving factor of why this webinar series, or why this specific webinar topic was picked. So Shout
It
out
was a
to you.
very close vote.
Very, very close vote. MDM, PPPC, oh my, sounds like a really good topic. You probably wouldn't have gotten Nathan and myself, but I digress. So uh, let's go right into the topics here. So, what do we mean by hardening macOS devices? There's a long-standing notion due to Apple's great marketing that macOS devices are innately secure or, just out of the box secure. Nathan, you and I talk about this very often, but
Yeah,
and I think it comes up
it's
pretty
like
often in the community, right?
yeah, like it kind of goes back to like this like old advertisements like way before any of the Mac devices that we see now were even a thing, like that the OS itself that comes Mac OS, the OS itself is just inherently secure. Um, and while they do make a lot of, or they have made a lot of improvements to security over time, like with the notarization or gatekeeper and things like that, um, there are, it's not full, like completely infallible, as with any device, especially devices that are connected to any kind of network. It will likely have some security issues that you may not have quite considered before. Um, and that's basically where we're going to get into like some of the guidelines that could help remediate or avoid issues or cyber attacks later down the line, um, and some frameworks as well.
Yeah, yeah, and to be frank, macOS does ship with several native macOS security tools like XProtect and MRT, malware removal tool. Um, but they are kind of what they are, and we'll talk about what we're seeing in the field, what a lot of security and compliance requirements dictate, and what tools need to be there. So we'll kind of talk more about that as we get to it. So what is hardening macOS devices mean, and what we mean by that is making it more resilient against threat actors. So what we're trying to do specifically is use recommendations or frameworks to make these devices more secure and mitigate the risk to them. Right? I think we all know where the risk primarily comes from, which is the user on the device, educating them, making sure they don't click specific links, you know, text text-based messages, any of those type of things, which are hard to control from a compliance framework or a risk framework. But there are things in there that aren't necessarily specific to the device, but like phishing campaigns, right? Know before
Mm.
and several other tools out there. There's even open source phishing frameworks like GoFish if you didn't want to spend the money. Um, but they really do help and educate the users. Wouldn't you agree, Nathan? Like applying a phishing training campaign really
Oh yeah,
educates people on what to do and to kind of not eliminate but reduce risk from the end user.
Sig- it significantly reduces risk if the training, appears to be working based on these phishing campaigns. You can see the results of them, because that's pretty much the primary attack vector for a lot of enterprises, large and small, just attacking the individuals in the company themselves, whether that's physical, like in the case of like you have a physical office, and someone pretends to be somebody that they're not, and then they get in, and you know how it goes. Similar idea with like emails, just like masking your identity or like pretending that you're a legitimate email, trying to get information or to give up credentials or anything like that. So while here we're going to go over more of the technical side of security, there is a policy aspect to it that is just as important, if not more important.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, policy and procedures really kind of help eliminate some of that risk when there's defined run books and things like that. But let's be honest, social engineering, phishing attacks and social engineering attacks are highly sophisticated these days. Yesterday, I think most of us have probably heard by now that Twilio suffered a breach because of a text-based phishing attack against their employees to reset their passwords, right? um, and they click the link from the text message. So It's becoming more and more prevalent. But again, to Nathan's point, we're talking about the devices specifically, how to secure them, how to harden them. That's more specific to hardening the employee, if you will, and
Yeah.
educating them on the internet experience, if for lack of a better term. So we're gonna talk about applying a whole bunch of security settings, right? I think the challenge with applying a bunch of security settings is it makes the ease of use more difficult for the device. So we'll talk about that quite regularly throughout this presentation. But long story short is that the more restrictive you get on the devices, the more restrictive framework you apply, meaning if you apply the highest security framework to the device, the less usable the device will be, unfortunately. This is
Mhm.
because a number of settings are designed from a user experience to make the device easier to use. As part of that ease of use, it makes it a little bit easier for a potential threat actor to take advantage of such features. So we'll talk more about that as well. And a lot of this is based off the MSCP, which is an open source effort to provide programmatic approach to generating security guidance. So you'll hear about this a lot. We'll send that link over in just a second. But this is an open source project around Apple's macOS operating system to kind of provide guidance around how to secure their devices, because I think, as we mentioned in the beginning, they aren't secure by default. They try and apply the best practices by default and etc. But there are some gaps there. So this is what we mean by hardening. I hope this kind of explain what this webinar is going to cover, and we're going to jump right into it.
Mhm.
Feel free to ask questions during the presentation. We will try our best to answer them if during the presentation. If we can't, we will try and address them after. There is a QA section after this, so no worries. All right. So automating security and compliance. Automating the security of devices. Some of the challenges you may face. Nathan, do you want to kind of take it over from here, and I will jump in.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of automating the security of devices, there may be some challenges that you will face along the way, like knowing which things that you want to, or which security controls you want to apply, or what not to apply for your devices. And even then, like there's some security controls for certain compliance frameworks that may not be quite possible on the particular OS that you're working with without the use of a third-party tool or some other method, like rate limiting, for example. It's not something you can do with macOS natively. And also these have implications for the end users and their usability. I know Ponce, you touched upon that earlier. Depending on what security controls you apply, it could possibly disrupt certain workflows as well. So it is important to kind of have that dialogue between your end users or your employees, so you can find the best set of security controls that would work for your specific needs in your company or enterprise environment.
Yeah, I think the best example of this is like we apply settings with the intention of complying with a security framework or compliance framework, right? Like CIS, NIST, and unfortunately, sometimes when we apply these frameworks, they have unintended consequences. One of which is we'll try and show today, which is like the login window has the ability to show a list of users, or you define the username and password. We've seen firsthand when you apply this login window payload, the problem is nobody really knows their username. I it's something so simple you would think most people know, but most people actually don't know their macOS username. And it's pretty surprising
Yeah.
and sometimes frustrating because you apply the login window payload based on the Nist standards, and it says that you need to have that there. Why? Because they already know the username in this case, right? So from a attack vector, you know the username. All you have to do is guess the password now, or find out the password. Whereas if you don't provide the username, they would have to know the username and the password. But the same thing with the end user now, right? The end user doesn't know their username. They know their password and they don't know how to log into their machine. And they'll create an IT ticket saying, hey, I don't know what
Yeah.
happened to my machine. I can't log in. I don't know why. And they're using whatever username they can make up at the time because they don't remember. So, I think that's definitely one of the examples that we could go on and on about, I bet. But yeah, I think the biggest kind of thing that we'll reiterate here is getting feedback. I know many of us have ticketing engines, ticketing platforms, ticketing systems. So we'll talk about a few ways to kind of get that from the end user. But giving them a way to give you feedback about what's going on, or what changes have caused problems is definitely key here. So let's go on here. All right, Nathan.
Yep. So the question, what should I do for security? So there's like a few guidelines that we recommend. First and foremost, we have a macOS security recommendations article. I believe that, yeah, that's a KV article. This title, Recommended macOS Security Configurations, that provides a pretty good set of base security configurations for your enterprise, and they can apply to any size company as well. But to go further than that, there are two compliance frameworks. One is CIS and one is Nist, and we'll go into the details of that later. But they have their own set of benchmarks as well that also map to each other. So choose one that you are most interested in and see which ones would work best for you in your particular environment. And that goes into having unique security requirements depending on your environment, your enterprise, or even like the type of business that you conduct, whether that's either public or private sector, may have certain nuance, like controls that you might want to apply. Like I know for government related things in the public sector, it definitely is much more restrictive, much more restrictive. So it really depends on what you need and what your customers or end users need.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. And we already got a question. Can you put these links in the chat? So that was answered in the Q&A section. There is a chat section. We have been sharing the links. We will continue having links in this presentation, and we'll continue sharing them. We will try and recap at the end the links as well, just in case if anybody missed them. And try and provide the slide deck after the webinar. We'll have to sync up with the marketing team about that one. But yeah, so obviously you can apply just our recommendations. You can apply compliance benchmarks. You can let the customer or end user decide what is needed based on their regulatory, environment, or whether they're government or contract work or whatever the case might be. So it's really up to you what is applied, because you guys are the IT administrators of Adigy. And what needs to be done should definitely be evaluated. Just because Nist requires something specific doesn't mean you necessarily need to apply it unless it's applicable to your business or your industry. And slide deck will be great. Yeah, we will try to provide this slide deck.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next section here. So here's some of the recommendations.
Yeah. So this is just some of the recommendations that we have relating to our blog. We have many. Just to name a few: enabling firewall or enabling MDM so you can allow for device lock and device wipe in the case that your device gets stolen or lost. Firewall, monitoring, remote login, monitoring, remote management, antivirus, anti-malware, gatekeeper, and so on. The blog post itself goes into more detail about how to set those controls for your environment.
Yeah, I think it's actually step by step with links to our scripts and the things in the product
Yeah.
to set this up. So it shouldn't be too difficult. We'll be actually going through some of these. And again, this is just a handful. This is just a basic recommendation of things to keep after or look after, if you will. Depending on what business sector you're in, what industry, etc., you may have more, you may have less. You may not need some of these, but these at a minimum will definitely be our recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's continue on here.
Compliance frameworks. So here we'll just get into some of the compliance frameworks that we'll be covering for this webinar. And we have made reference to them previously. One is Nist, and the other one is CIS, or CIS rather. And in the next slide, we kind of just go more into that.
I'm gonna just call out a couple questions here. Sorry, Nathan, for slowing you down.
Yeah, no worries.
There was a question: does Adigy sell to MSPs only? No, we sell to pretty much anybody who manages Apple devices, IT administrators specifically. But I mean, technically, you don't need to be an IT admin. We actually can help you do that stuff. But MSPs, EDU, enterprise, all of the above, I guess is the answer. There was another good question: is domain joining a Mac a recommended practice? Now, I know a lot of people audit things through their Active Directory, and in that case, you may want to join your Mac to a Active Directory environment. I will say, from our perspective, is it recommended? Not really. Mainly because if you're using Adigy, you have a bunch of tools to kind of do a very similar workflow as Active Directory, like using Adigy Identity to log in with Microsoft, Azure AD credentials to the machine, which enforces MFA and amongst other things. So I do know sometimes binding a Mac to an Active Directory can cause a loss of functionality and perform things that you didn't really expect. So if you want to bind your Mac to an Active Directory environment or plan to bind customers to an Active Directory environment, I would just recommend testing it out, make sure the workflow is good for you. And we'll follow up with that question. All right, we're getting a bunch of questions, so I'm gonna just try and answer them directly and send them to everybody. But Nathan, let's continue on here.
Yeah, for sure. So first off, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's just an organization of the U.S. Department of Commerce that provides a sort of a standard set of guidelines and security controls. And to be NIST compliant is entirely self-assessed. There isn't really like a central authority that gives you a certification for NIST or anything like that. It's just a set of guidelines that the US government highly recommends. So, but there are in cases where you may be pursuing SOC 2, for example, and then you claim that you are following NIST guidelines, they may ask for proof of that. So it's a bit nuanced in that regard. A similar idea for CIS. They also provide a set of baseline configurations for some agreed standards, and both of these generally would enable any organization to prevent cyber attacks or any threat actors trying to acquire information or sensitive info or anything of that sort.
Yeah, very well said. I think it's just a compilation of mainly government agencies trying to provide a baseline for programmatic security guidance is the end all be all, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about CIS.
CIS, yeah, Center for Internet Security. Just a set of best practices. They do map to a bunch of standards and regulatory frameworks, including the NIST cybersecurity framework, like we mentioned earlier, as well as NIST SP 853 and ISO 27000 series of standards. PCI DSS, HIPAA, and others. They all kind of are related in some way or another, and there is a lot of overlap between many of these security or compliance frameworks. And in addition, there are several levels, or there are a few levels to the CIS benchmarks. So level 1 is basic essential security requirements that you can configure in any system and shouldn't really disrupt much, if any. And level 2 is much greater security that could probably reduce some functionality here and there. So you have to do some due diligence and see what would work best depending on what environment you're working with.
100%. I think we're going to cover Nist in just a second here, but just from our perspective, I think CIS is a little bit easier to achieve, and level 1 is fairly common practice for most. It aligns with a lot of the recommendations we provide. There are obviously some things that you will still need to apply, but by and large, that's kind of what we recommend. And then there are some that, as you review these benchmarks, you'll realize that some of them can't even be managed technically today on the device, meaning there's no solution baked into macOS or even scriptable. You would have to somehow find a third-party solution if one exists. And then there's a bunch of benchmarks that also are just inherently applied by default on the device, if that makes sense. So like they just ship out of the box as being compliant. Not all settings, just like not all settings can be managed, but we'll talk about that in a second. Nathan, this is just a wall of text for the Nist disclaimer, right? And kind of what it's about and what it was intended to do. Really, it's responsible for developing information security standards and guidelines, including minimum requirements for federal information systems. So again, these frameworks are intended to provide guidance for securing and hardening the devices. They don't eliminate risk. They don't make the machine,
unhackable, whatever.
Yeah,
that's not a thing.
As long as there is a human using these devices, there is some sort of risk involved. All right, let's go to the next slide. Nancy, you want to take that one away?
Yeah, there are many benchmarks that pertain to Nist. They have 3 levels to their framework: low, moderate, and high, whereas the low security baseline is 131 controls, medium is 177, and high is 188. So it ramps up, of course.
Yeah, I will say Nist compared to CIS is a lot more prescriptive, a lot more controlling on the device. There's a lot more settings that will potentially impact.
Very stringent.
Yeah, they'll impact the user, very stringent, that they will notice and they will have sometimes trouble using the device. And in that case, we need to understand what the workarounds are, if any, what the ramifications if we don't enable that control. By and large, many auditors don't go, from what we've seen or participated with, they don't go control by control and making sure every control is enforced, just that you're following some framework or guidelines or recommendations for hardening the devices and following up with them. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Want to take this one, Nathan?
Yeah, and we kind of mentioned this already before in the terms of unique security requirements, but it can cause issues for usability in general and some workflows that you may be using in your company. Just be cognizant of that and make sure that what you're applying is relevant and also working well with the processes that you already have in place in whatever industry that you're working in. So yeah, you may want to tweak these security requirements a bit. And this can also be done relatively easy with Adigy as well, especially with the compliance engine that we're coming out with, which we will show you a little bit of. But right now, like you can basically build your own monitoring items at the moment. And with the compliance engine, you will be able to implement some of the, or test for like some of these benchmarks that we will mention later on
Yeah.
to
So
check if devices are in or out of compliance.
yeah. So at the end of the day, kind of what we're saying here is sometimes you may want to use a combination of things or a unique subset of configurations. So this is definitely possible, and we've seen this regularly, like where you want sys level 1, but then you don't want this one setting or this other setting because it's preventing users from doing something, right? Our users aren't logging into their machines with smart cards, as an example. So like we're not going to enforce that from Nist, things like that. All right, let's go on here. So feedback. This was kind of a recommendation. This is a raw recommendation. You definitely don't have to do this, but you definitely want to check with the users how things are working. So once you apply security recommendations or configurations, you may have monitoring set up to know what's happening on the device, but you may not understand the user experience unless they tell you something. Um, you know, they didn't necessarily tell us in our example that they didn't know their login username. They just didn't know how to log into their machine, and that's when they created the ticket to say, "Hey, I can't log into my machine. I don't know I don't know how to log in. My password's different." And then it's like, well, your password's not different. Um, you know, what's really different is that you don't know your username, and we're not showing the little tile for them to click with their avatar, whatever their avatar is, and to just click that and type in their password, and now they don't know their username to type in the password, and that's where they're stuck. So there's a few ways to get feedback. We got a feedback here. Once computers are used by bots, we will be safe. I don't know if
Where
some of the movies
are
will be
used by bots only? I don't know about that one. I've read some weird science fiction where like like warfare is being conducted entirely by artificial intelligence, like cyber warfare, things like that. So I think we'll be safer, especially considering that these bots are also designed by humans, and of course we know humans are very not perfect. Not
yeah,
perfect at all.
we got a feedback. We got a response saying, "Trust me," and I never.
Trust me.
Trust but
I don't
verify.
know.
Trust but verify is my model. All right. So long story short, self-service tickets. You can always enable self-service. Have them submit a feedback ticket. If you're not familiar with that, we'll kind of do a quick showcase of that, if you will. Recurring maintenance to prompt the user if they're having issues, or you can even set up a script in self-service to have them press a button when they need help. And that can collect logs, amongst other things, feedback, so on and so forth. We got a bunch of comments and questions coming in. We'll be getting to those in just a second here. All right. So automating and remediating the hardening across devices, locations, clients, whatever you call them, they're either usually one of these three things is what we usually refer to them: clients, locations, companies, devices. Essentially, we use our policies to do that. But not just our policies, we have a bunch of pre-built monitoring and remediation, community scripts, and facts in the product out of the box. And it comes with this stuff. You just have to create an account if you don't have one, or if you have an account, you should have all this stuff in there. If you don't, reach out to us because it should get pre-created by default. But all of this is just required for you to assign to them to the desired policies. We'll kind of walk through that in a second. And I see a lot of questions about conditional access, the compliance engine. We'll be talking about that quite a bit here in just a second. But yeah, this is essentially the predefined content that we'll be talking about quite extensively. This is also referenced in our recommendations of things you should secure, alerts you should set up, monitoring and remediation, maintenance, etc. On top of that, you can set up notifications. So when something falls out of compliance, monitoring and remediation is critical to that, right? So we don't want to necessarily monitor things we already know are resolved. So that's where this stuff comes in really handy. Essentially, you can generate an alert when something is triggered, right? When something falls out of compliance or a security control is disabled, perhaps, or changed, or a user is added, or a user is modified, whatever the case might be. User fails to log in X amount of times. This can be delivered in the form of an email. This can be a ticket. As you can see here, we picked quite possibly the prettiest PSA ticketing integration to showcase, which was the ConnectWise Manage integration. But yeah, it would generate the alert if the alert is resolved, or the ticket, I should say, if the remediation runs and is successful, actually automatically close that ticket for you. So your techs or anybody else do not need to per se respond to that issue. But if the remediation fails, like in this case, it'll leave the ticket open. It'll output the exit code or whatever output was in the script that ran. In this case, it was just an example of it failing. So I just put 0 and leave the ticket open for a tech to remediate. There's also several integrations that you can integrate with. But essentially, this is kind of what the notifications can do. You can generate an alert, you can generate an email, you can generate a ticket, or you can potentially do it with integrations. We'll talk about the integrations in just a second here. Are there any plans for ServiceNow or Jira help desk tickets in the future? I will say ServiceNow is something we've been talking about quite a bit. So there might be some other alternatives in the short term to integrate with ServiceNow. And if you're interested in that, reach out to me. Happy to help here. Another one are custom email notifications in the roadmap. You can define each monitoring alert with custom emails and stuff like that, but the actual text and body of the alert, I don't know of any plans to allow you to modify this stuff, but I don't see why we couldn't. I'll show some other examples here in just a second of maybe other things you can do. So you can use integrations. We have a pretty open API that can do a lot of different things like run MDM commands or upload software or get alerts. In this example, we're using a tool called Zapier, which integrates with over 5,000 applications. We have an integration with them. I'll post the link in just a second if you're interested. It's freemium. It's a freemium tool, meaning it's free up until an extent, and then once you start using it quite extensively, you have to pay. But it allows you to define custom workflows with the Adigy API into 5,000 other applications that it supports. So if you're not familiar with programming or coding, no worries. It gives you like an interactive GUI to define your workflows. We'll just show in a second here. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a Slack Zapier channel where it shows when an alert is detected in Adigy. It gives you a go live link to the device. So you can navigate directly to the device. You could get as creative as you want here, including adding buttons to do things. It was just a quick example. All right. Here's an example of the workflow builder. So if you wanted to monitor the system events and only continue if a user logged in and then post that message to Slack, you can tell when people log into the Adigy environment. You could send that to any other tool Zapier integrates with. Here's like a more advanced workflow where if an alert is triggered in Adigy for a new device, we look up that device if it's new, find the employee in Bamboo HR, and then move that device to the right policy for that user, whether they're in like an engineering or something else that's more specific to an enterprise role, but enterprise model. But I'm sure MSPs could find similar workflows for each of their customers. So So here is the link. I'm going to post that in the Slack channel here. I mean, not the Slack channel. What am I saying?
Slack channel.
The GoToWebinar chat. If you're interested, again, it's free, so feel free to give it a spin, try it out. It might integrate with a bunch of your apps you already use, which is even better. If you're on Slack, you might be a fan of it. Yeah, thank you, Alex. How am I doing bandwidth-wise, Nathan? Am I okay?
Your video's not great. You're
Yeah,
lagging a little bit.
yeah, that's what Alex said. Alex, thank you for calling out. It seems like I'm lagging just a little bit. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you,
Okay.
but yeah, it is lagging.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. So let's get back into this. Zapier is one integration, but again, we have a bunch of public API endpoints available. We're actually working on some other similar API tools. So if you don't use Zapier, if you use other tools like Tray.io, we're looking at adding those as well. If you have another API tool similar and you want to see what that's about, please let us know. Yeah, I'm gonna turn off my webcam here
No worries.
and see if that helps.
Yeah, yeah, you're good.
All right, we'll see. We'll see. It might not help, but we'll see. All right. All right, so we're gonna go straight into the live demo and sneak peek of the compliance stuff. But before we do, I'm gonna answer some questions that came up.
Yeah, we have a few, quite a few.
Yeah. One of the questions was, how can I create an admin that's hidden? So if you're creating an admin with Automate Device Enrollment, you can actually make a hidden admin through the Automate Device Enrollment section. So if you're doing it via script, you have to pass is hidden equals 1 flag through the script. We can help you with that. Definitely submit a ticket in support, and we can definitely guide you through modifying your script to do so. Will the Addergy compliance feature support compliance validation documentation? Yes, I'm going to show a little bit about that. Is there any integration with Workspace ONE MDM? I'm going to say no, but you might be able to integrate it with Zapier or Tray or through the APIs if you're interested. I'm curious to kind of know what you're trying to do there, but happy to help. Are custom email notifications on the roadmap? I don't think so, but submitted support ticket. Let's get a community feedback going and raise that to the product team. Here's a great question. Who gets notified on those alerts? So we're going to go over here to monitoring. You can see all these monitoring alerts that are pre-created in my environment. I'm actually going to go to the catalog to look at them really quickly. But each monitoring alert actually will allow you to define an email. So right now, it was mentioned that it goes to all admins. I will definitely check out the send email per monitor. The nice thing about this is each monitor can go to a unique person. So if you're managing multiple clients or want specific alerts to go to specific people, you can put unique email addresses here. With that said, if you are using the self-service, it will go to the support email, or it will go to the ticketing integration that you have defined. So if you're using Autotask as an example, or ConnectWise Manage, or Zendesk, or Freshdesk, or whatever else, right? It'll create the ticket through the API, so it won't actually trigger an email. All of these will always show under the monitoring tab, under monitoring alerts. I don't think we have any here, but if they did, they would generate here as well. Question, I'll leave that one to the end. Yeah, if you're not using script, okay, if you are using script, yeah, we can help you guide through that. All right, so let's get back into the sneak peek. So We mentioned it's as simple as just assigning the alerts you want to use to the policy where your devices are registered. You'll see if they have remediation applied. So in this case, if Gatekeeper is disabled, we're automatically going to detect that, remediate it once the once the device is online and checking in. We'll monitor that every 5 minutes. If the device status changes whatsoever, Gatekeeper monitoring alert is going to try and re-enable Gatekeeper if it ever changes. So just like that, just coming in here, assigning the monitoring, I'm able to set up like a majority of our recommendations um, um, just that quickly. Um, Now you can obviously add as much complexity as you want here. You can set up maintenance items to do several different things. All of these were pre-created in my environment or this brand new environment we created yesterday. Um, and these also can reference scripts. You can also find a plethora of information in the facts and scripts in the community that can be copied down and leveraged. Nathan has actually authored several malware removal scripts that can be applied, and um, just as simple
Yeah.
as copying a device fact to look for those malwares, or um, and then applying the script as remediation. So if the fact detects it, we copy down the fact, we apply the monitoring with the fact, and it's just as simple as that to monitor if sysjoker malware is detected, as an example. Um, Now, just full transparency, Adigy is not an antivirus, anti-malware tool. We are essentially a device management platform, but we can do things like that. If you are using an antivirus or anti-malware tool, as we recommend, you should. Sometimes these settings can conflict. So sometimes we're looking for things and the antivirus is looking for things, but at the end of the day, we're doing all these different kind of compliance frameworks and configuration settings because 100%, a lot of times we as IT admins are being questioned about the cybersecurity posture, right? So are the devices secure? What are we doing to secure them? These are things we're doing to secure them. A lot of times we'll get cyber insurance questionnaires, right? Cyber insurance has been skyrocketing as of late, and they've been giving like really strict questionnaires since, right? Like they even ask like, is Kaseya installed on these devices, right? Are you using a next-gen antivirus? Are you using an endpoint detection and response tool? Are you encrypting the devices? Are you using MFA on the devices? Are you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and it keeps going on and on and on. And these things all help us manage and maintain these devices and ensuring compliance, so that we can also attest to these auditors or the insurance companies that we are doing our best to secure these devices and mitigating risk. All right. Now for the sneak peek, if you will, here. Many of you probably already see it. There's a compliance tab here. And very soon, next, I want to say, Nathan's going to have to keep me honest. I think it's at the end of the presentation as well. The next product update, the product team is going to announce this feature. They're going to talk more about it and kind of what it does, but at a high level, it's going to come with pre-packed solutions like this: Sys Level 1 compliance, Nist 853R5. I see um, so someone asked, how can I get that, or can I have access to it? I'm gonna say tune in for the product update, and they should be taking participants for a private beta. As you can see, we're using in our production environment today, so it is in a closed beta right now, but it should be available as a private beta for those who want to contribute early on. You know, very soon here is what I'm gonna say. So if you come into catalog, you can actually build your own benchmarks. Benchmarks, think of them as frameworks. So if we put our presentation into practicality here, if you will, the level 1 compliance is this level 1, kind of what we talked about, the least restrictive. Adigy-based security is like our recommendations that we kind of provided at the beginning of the slide. And then Nist 800 low is the lowest framework model that had, what was it, Nathan, 133 controls on it?
133. Yeah.
Yeah. So the nice part about this is you're going to be able to actually control and dictate which rules you want in the benchmark. So if you wanted to create your own benchmark, if you will, you could. I'm going to go ahead and demo this right now. So let's.
131.
Thank
Yeah.
you. So
You're close.
so hardening macOS device webinar benchmark, if we will, right? We get to define what OS this applies to. I'm going to just say 12.0. And if we wanted to, we can combine a number of different things or just one thing from a couple different frameworks. I'm just going to select a few at random here. Once you do that, obviously this benchmark will use those rules that we define in the rules section, which actually, if I look at them, just use a fact. So in this case, it's going to have a fact for CIS level 1 auditing framework. This is like a specific section in CIS level 1, and it's going to have an automatic remediation script tied to it that would automatically remediate should the auditing settings are not be in place, right? When we go to policies now, all we would need to do is assign this compliance framework. As you can see, I have actually 2 compliance frameworks assigned to the same policy. Now, if I look at these devices, or if I look at this device as an example, you'll see a compliance status here that says fail. And if I click on it, it's actually going to show me why it's failing. So from a CIS level 1 compliance, I am okay. But from a Nist 853 R5 compliance level, I am not okay. And I fail. So it allows you kind of granularity and the ability to stack different frameworks on top of each other should you want to, things like that. What they'll talk a lot about is what I think many people are interested in, which was the Intune integration. As you can see here, I think it's actually renamed at this point to Microsoft Endpoint Manager, but we will be probably updating that before it goes live. So long story short, this compliance engine is going to give you a pass or fail status based on the compliance benchmarks and rules you define in the catalog. So it kind of summarizes everything we just talked about and everything we just did, and it comes prepackaged and in the catalog, as you would see like this, with the ability to create your own or define your own rules. And essentially that should, you know, simplify hardening macOS devices based on a framework level. But obviously, as we mentioned, if you just apply a blanket framework to the devices, it may cause unintended consequences or settings that the end users don't need or know about. So just keep that in mind. We hear that a lot. I apply this security settings and now my end users can't do this or they can't do that. That's kind of why this was designed and kind of the way to kind of be customizable and modifiable for you all to say, hey, I want to achieve level 1 compliance, but I need to remove this setting, or this setting is causing the work to be, you know, unachievable for the end users. So Mike, I hope that answers your question. Tune in to the product update. Let me actually go back to the webinar, the presentation here. I'm pretty sure it's next week at noon, August 17th. I'm gonna get killed if this is wrong, but I didn't make this portion of the slide deck, so I'll just blame someone else, if you will. So I'm pretty sure we're going to be talking about this a lot more August 17th next week at noon Eastern. If you haven't, let me copy this event and send it over in the chat so you guys can register. They'll probably do a much more deeper dive on how it will integrate with Intune and potentially other identity providers or compliance solutions, if you will, that are out there. I know there's a bunch of other ones like Okta Device Trust and things like that. Someone suggested Jump Cloud. But at the grand scheme of things, what Adigy is going to be doing is using a lot of the information we already have and collecting some new information to ensure that the device is in compliance. And if the device is not in compliance, meaning it doesn't meet our security baseline, it's going to be in a fail or pass status. And if it's in a fail, then you can take that to the identity providers and say, identity provider, this device isn't in compliance. Do not let them access our company resources or our, or their company resources or whatever the case may be. So I know we're almost at the top of the hour here, so I do want to get to some questions. I hope everybody kind of enjoyed what we discussed today, and it's kind of like the sneak peek. Again, it's going to be more next week about this compliance engine and how it works with Intune or Microsoft Endpoint Manager. I'm going to keep saying that all day. All right. So if you got to bounce, I see Travis got to bounce. Have a great day, week, afternoon. We're going to be here answering more questions, probably for another 10 more minutes or so, to see if you guys need to get answers here. I see a question is, how can we make sure access is coming from the hardened device and not a personal device? I think that's the beauty about this. I think like if with the conditional access, like if they didn't have Adigy installed and it wasn't marked as compliant, like they're using their personal device, they most likely will not be able to log into their Microsoft resources, as an example, because it's not a compliant device, right? Who knows what's on that personal device? Could even have ransomware potentially. So I think that's kind of the purpose. I know the DoD and NIST and a whole bunch of government agencies have been pushing conditional access because of that very reason. But yeah, I think that's the intention. Obviously, you can probably make some rules around that, but I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. Here's a great question by Landon. The compliance section has prepackaged rules for the auditing section, but let's say there's one setting in that section I have a requirement to change. We'll have the granularity to change those individual settings. That's something we've been looking at with the compliance engine, and we've been trying to make it as granular as possible, but still not making it so piecemeal that it's like 100, 300. I think, as we mentioned, this like one low is 133, right? So that would be 133 settings that got to be managed. So, if you want have feedback around that, Landon, want to test it out, want to learn more, definitely ask to be part of the beta. And let's get that feedback in so we can understand, what settings are trying to be changed, but totally understand that one. Does Adigy ever plan on adding support for Windows endpoints? PC endpoints, but I'm pretty sure we mean Windows endpoints here. That's a great question. I can't comment on that. I would say our strength and our expertise lies on the Apple side right now. That may change, but that's kind of what our main focus is, and that's where we spend a lot of our time. And we try to provide the best Apple device management experience out there. So that's kind of where we spend a lot of our time doing it. Here's a great question that we mentioned earlier. Is like, what can cause a conflict with the antivirus or anti-malware solution? Can it cause a performance issue? No, actually, more so that like if you apply a fact that's checking for malware, that Adigy is going to check for that malware presence, right? Then if you have an antivirus or anti-malware solution checking for that, it could potentially flag that flag us for checking that if that flag or that file is there, and if that file is there, it can flag Adigy like, hey, Adigy is doing something, but Adigy is just checking if that file exists, as an example. So I hope that answers your question. I see Nathan already answered it, so sorry about that.
There's like certain keywords that we have that we're checking for, and anti-malware antiviruses might see that and think it's something malicious, and it would just probably delete it or do something.
We're still on premise AD binding. Is there a fix for the upcoming Microsoft patch that will break binding max to AD. You know, you guys are using Jamf Connect for local on Active Directory on premise. Will Adigy identity support non-Azure AD local Active Directory? That's a great question. I don't believe so. We used to support local AD with Nomad login. Rich, I would say submit a ticket, kind of telling us what you're looking for. I kind of have a great, I think I have a pretty good understanding what you're looking for and what you want. You know, I'm not honestly, I can't comment on whether identity will be able to support that or they'll build that feature or not. I'm not a product manager, but um, you know, that's out of my scope, if you will, and Nathan's as well. I'll just speak on Nathan's behalf. Richard, with a great question. Are we going to provide clients a reporting showing compliance? Yes, that is on the roadmap and a dashboard as well as part of the compliance engine. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, great question. Conditional access with Google Workspace, a possibility using new compliance feature. It is something we have been looking at. We are, in fact, a Google Workspace shop ourselves. So it is something I've been looking at personally. If you haven't, I think I'm still sharing my screen, right, Nathan?
Yeah.
There is, we published a KB article that essentially shows how you can do conditional access without a compliance engine. This allows you to set up conditional access today without the compliance engine. It's certificate-based access, meaning if you look here, we're giving access. If you're familiar with the conditional access modal, you essentially here, we set up a custom policy based on session to check with their new app called Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. This will essentially allow you to prevent users from logging in unless they have a certificate installed on the machine. You can deploy that certificate through Adigy MDM. We actually have a integration with Secure W2 that we worked on for SCEP certificates. So if you're even interested, you can programmatically provide dynamic SCEP certificates to each device and then make them like the source of truth, whether the device should have access to the company resources or not. You can, fun fact, you can actually do a very similar workflow with Google right now, should you not want to wait, Miles. Mike asked, what was the patch number that's going to break binding macOS to AD? We weren't given that patch number, but I'm pretty sure we can find it really quickly. Rich was kind enough to put that there. Maybe Rich knows. Rich, if you do know and don't mind sharing it with us real quick, otherwise we'll have to do the classic Google search. Here's a really good question. In fact, I was supposed to answer it earlier and I said we will circle back. But Alex asked, if I have a Mac running Parallels, do you provide security for both operating systems? Now, I guess that's a tricky question because I guess it depends on what operating system you're running through Parallels. I'm going to show you, you can, if you're not familiar with Parallels, it's a virtualization software. We use it internally here for quite a bit of testing. And you can build a bunch of different operating systems. So I guess, can we secure the host? Yes, if it's Mac. Can we secure the guest? If it's not Mac OS, then I'm going to say no because I'm going to say it depends. We have very light support for Raspberry Pi. So if you're building like a version of Raspbian OS in Parallels, sure. But if you're trying to secure Windows with Adigy, that's not going to work very well. But if you build macOS devices on top of your macOS host, you can install Adigy on them and you can manage them and test with them. That's actually how we do a lot of our testing internally. Obviously, we have physical machines, but it's very easy to take a snapshot and build machines through Parallels without having to test with physical ones. And there's a second follow-up question that I'll answer in just a second, Alex, but I'm going to send this information over to Mike, who was asking what patch is going to break Active Directory. This is the patch info in October. They will remove log only option and enforce it. And I'm going to send that to you, Mike, and I'll send it to everybody else in case you guys want to read up on it. Definitely looks like an interesting topic. I'm going to share that with some of the... all right. Okay. So do I need 2 licenses to support Mac with Parallels or VMware running Windows? So by and large, if you install an Adigy, it'll consume a device license, but usually we don't like measure by individual licenses. It's kind of like, how many total licenses do you have? And if it exceeds that, it'll, trigger something, but it won't shut down your account or anything. macOS devices, every macOS device you install the agent on will appear as a device. But again, we can't install on Windows, so yeah, we're not going to be able to manage Windows devices. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Alex, but yeah, I see you asked another one. I'll get to it in just a second. Is Adigy identity built into the price? Yes, it is. Just like all our integrations, except for Malwarebytes, because we have to pay them for that resource, right? All these integrations are part of the cost of using the service, so you can use any one of these. Live Desktop, Identity, Live Terminal, Splashtop, the Watchman integration. Actually, I saw a Watchman question that we got to get to. And Alex, your follow-up question, can you work alongside another security program that protects Windows and Adigy protects Mac? So if there's a Windows antivirus tool that also works on macOS, you can install it on macOS and Adigy should be fine on it. I think that's the question. But if I'm misunderstanding, Alex, let me know, or let Nathan know, or let both of us know. We're happy to help there. Right. So there was a Watchman question I didn't speak on specifically, but I will get to it now. Where is it? Where did it go? Okay. I use Watchman to generate my tickets in my PSA. How can I avoid Adigy and Watchman duplicate info into the PSA? In that case, I would just say let one system create the alerts or tickets. Don't use both is my suggestion. So if you're using Watchman to generate the alerts, use Watchman, don't use Adigy. But if there's stuff in Adigy that that can't be done in Watchman, because I think Watchman's read-only, you may want to set it up in Adigy, but don't actually generate a email. So you can just remove the email, just generate an alert, and it will just generate an alarm in Adigy. So it will just appear as a monitoring item here, but it won't actually, it won't actually generate any tickets in Synchro or whatever tools we're using, if that makes sense. But you'll still have the ability to automatically remediate and things like that. Is Adigy considered a SOC for Mac? That's a great question. A SOC is usually a security operations center more than a product, in my opinion. So it's more like a bunch of people monitoring something 24/7, making sure, fielding security alerts and things like that. But I wouldn't say it's like a security operations center where, like, we have a bunch of people watching your environment. I would say you can do a lot of security-oriented compliance, device management, regulation things, but it's not like, someone's going to watch all your alerts and act upon them for you, but that doesn't mean someone can't. Do you have a script that deploys Sentinel-1s to Mac? I think we have a KB article on this.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we do.
Yeah, so here we go. I'm going to send this over to you. Here's how to deploy Sentinel-1 from Adigy. Our support team does this quite often. CrowdStrike, Sophos, I think we get a question pretty often is what's the best antivirus tool to use? And I don't know, we don't like to take preference too much, but we like Malwarebytes a lot. There's also quite a bit of other antivirus tools out there. In fact, we're a sponsor for Patrick Wardle, who has a bunch of open source tools. So if you don't want to pay, you're on a tight budget, maybe it's at school or nothing to kind of acquire software with. There's a bunch of cool tools he provides. Block, DND, Lulu, Knock Knock, Oversight. If you're familiar with tools like Little Snitch, if you're familiar, actually there's one of these apps actually will show you what's persistently running on your machine, like login items, things like that. True story, actually, I'm on Ventura, and they're actually going to make that more prevalent, and you're actually going to see everything that is persistent on your machine now through system preferences. They obviously remodeled the whole system preferences and not call it system settings, but his tools will actually prompt you and let you know that something new is there. If something is using your camera, it'll actually let you know, which is pretty cool as well. So these are actually free and open source. You can check it out. Definitely fun to play with, and it might show you when something's trying to, look at your screen or something. All right, so we're about 15 minutes over, and I think that concludes most of the questions. If the KB is missing something, definitely submit a ticket. It should have everything you need, but it might. Obviously, Sentinel-1 can change things. I see you need full disk access. You're probably just going to need to build the PPC payload. As part of Smart Software, we can try and automatically build that for you, but you might need to encompass all of these different binaries that they have. But yeah, I think that concludes most of the questions. So unless there's anything else, we'll hang out here for one more minute and then we're going to call it. Thank you so much for joining today. Sorry for my internet. I will make sure we get that corrected next time. But have a great Tuesday. Please tune in next week for the product update to find more about the compliance engine and how it's going to integrate with Microsoft and all the good stuff. Yes, this is a regular webinar. If you guys haven't checked it out, let me actually do one more plug here. We've done a couple of these already. Some are better than others. I will say that some of them may involve me. No, I'm joking. John, who's head of product, and Joel, who's the senior product manager, are going to talk about conditional access in next month. But more specifically, the product update is in a week. So I'm going to send this over. I already did. Feel free to register. There's also been historical sudo talks webinars that you can also catch up on. And let me just find those for you guys. Let's see if we can get it here. Yeah, so here's one Iggy and I did about virtualizing and testing macOS was really cool. Definitely check it out if you want to test with devices, if you're not sure how to begin, where to start. It really helps with all that stuff. So there are a bunch of sudo talks already that you can find on their addigy.com/resources if you want to watch the historical recording. So if you're looking at identity, here's one. There was Ask a Hacker, the WWDC after party where we talked about some of the Ventura changes. So a lot of good webinars out there, and we're going to keep them coming. All right. With that said, everybody have a great Tuesday, and we'll catch you next week. Bye, folks.